Amen, amen. We be seated. So about 2,000 years ago, we talked about the idea that Jesus rose from the grave, a powerful act. One that at the time I don't think many people kind of understood. 2 weeks before that, though, we talked about Jesus Christ coming in. He was riding on a donkey. There was a foal. They're coming into town, and all the city is proclaiming, Hosanna, Hosanna, glory to him in the highest, right? It just becomes this praise of this king that they had longed for. They weren't maybe singing holy like we're talking about here, but they knew that Jesus was different. Now in this, it says Jesus rode into town, and as he rode into town, he finally gets to the point, it talks about in Mark 11, where he enters Jerusalem, he goes into the temple, and I love this statement, he looked around. He looked around at everything. It says he was getting late, and so he went back to Bethphage, went back to Bethany, but it wasn't before first taking a look at this temple, this place in which people were to encounter the living God. Well, the next day, he's going back into town. We learn in Matthew that as he goes back into town, he goes by this fig tree. And we'll talk about what it means here in just a little bit. But as he walks by it, he looks at it, and what he expected, because fig trees weren't supposed to have figs on them yet, but he sees these leaves, and he's like, there must be figs. And he goes up to it, and he realizes there's no figs, and he curses the tree. And the disciples see the whole thing dies, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. And I'm going to leave you wondering what's going on. And they kept going into town. That one that had ridden the donkey into town, that one that had been not on a horse, but instead one who had been reaching out to the people of Israel saying, come to me, I am your Messiah, now sees the city of Jerusalem. In Luke 19, it says he saw this city that God had placed his love upon, this city that the very temple of God that had rested in. And in it, Jesus' heart broke. He knew that they were about ready to fully reject him. He knew that they were going to send him to the cross. He knew then finally in 70 AD, not much longer, maybe 40 years later, that the consequences for rejecting the king would be that this city would be leveled. In fact, no stone, actually the way it was, no stone was left on top of the other. They had fully rejected this Messiah. But as he enters in to this particular city, it says he came in, and the first place that this guy goes to, Jesus Christ, he goes to the temple. Now, if you know anything about it, we've been teaching about King Jesus, and he's not just anyone. He is truly man. We've talked a lot about that, but he is also truly God. And I thought 1,000 years before that, he had told this guy named King David, this one that the Jews revered incredibly, that I'm going to build a temple in there. Your son's actually going to be the one that's going to build it, but it's going to be the dwelling place of God. Jesus Christ is fully God, truly God, was there when that temple came about. And now all of a sudden, there he is staring at this temple, this place that was supposed to be the meeting place of God. And he had set his mind on it. He had set to come to it. And he was about ready to pick a fight. Now, we don't oftentimes think of Jesus as picking a fight, do we? Like most of us, when we see pictures of Jesus, especially like the European version, he's like, hi, I'm Jesus. It's just like this dainty little man. But in this particular picture, you see Jesus coming in, and he truly is Messiah. He's not just the Messiah who is the king, but in this case, he's coming in as the one that Hebrews 4 talks about as the true high priest. And we know that the place that he goes for, his target, is the temple. Now, why the temple? See, to a lot of people, the Messiah would have come in and wouldn't have never gone to the temple. He would have gone to Fortress Antonia. Fortress Antonia was this fortress that oversaw the temple. There were these soldiers. It says there was at least a legion there. There were several of these soldiers that were there that would have been somehow making sure to control what was going on, to protect from any unrest that was happening around the temple. If this is truly the Messiah who came to rule the world, to reign and rule over all things, well, certainly he was going to go there first. But that's not where Jesus was going. well, okay, maybe he wasn't going to go there, but maybe he was going to go to the praetorium where Herod was. Man, he's kind of a fake king, and so he was going to come in, and he was going to cause an uprising, kick out Herod, go in, knock out all the soldiers, and finally the Jewish people would have this king that they'd ever always longed for. But that's not where he went. He went to the temple. Why? See, the thing about Jesus is that he knew our greatest problem is not the government that's around us. Our greatest problem are not even the social ills that are around us. Our greatest problem is not our husband. Our greatest problem is not our wife. Our greatest problem is not our children. Our greatest problem is not our parents. Our greatest problem is not our job. Our greatest problem is not our boss. Our greatest problem is not any of those things. All throughout the book of Matthew, the greatest problem that we face is our heart. He was coming to transform the heart, because the reason that we have bad government and the reason that we have bad situations, the reason that marriages don't get along, the reason that families don't get along, the reason that workplaces don't work is not because he was there to fix them necessarily. Now, don't get me wrong, he's coming back one day and he's going to fix all of these things. But those things exist because the heart had to be dealt with. Our problem is not those things. Our problem is right worship. And he was going to the very place in which worship was supposed to be rightly handled. It says in there, Matthew 21, Jesus entered the temple. I've always told you before, there's certain scenarios I would have loved to have been there for. Here's the very one who had told David and talked to Solomon about what this temple was going to look like and what its purpose was and what the intent was. He was there the day the Spirit of God indwelt the Holy of Holies. He was there the day there was praise. All these things would happen. He knew what it was supposed to be. And there he stands that day before the very place that he had created for people to come and encounter him. His target was the temple. But it wasn't just that he had a target, he also had a purpose. He intended to cleanse the temple because the temple had become something that it was never supposed to be. See, in it, you had these different courtyards. You had like the courtyard of the Gentiles, in which those of even us, right, would have gone to. Those of us that weren't Jewish, we would have gone in there. Those with disabilities would have gone in there. It would have been the place in which maybe us that still would be included into what God was doing. We still, because the temple would go on high, we'd be able to stand there and see the Holy of Holies and know this was the place that God created for the nations, for all peoples, no matter our abilities, no matter our background, our ethnicity, our socioeconomic condition. God had created a place to encounter him. The next place we have in there is the temple court for women that would have been Jewish women. We had now Jewish men. They would go and represent their families. They would take their offerings. But the whole point of it was that humanity would be able to encounter the living God. Now when it walks in, here's Jesus. And it says he began to drive out all who sold and bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers, the seats of those who sold pigeons. That's a picture of Jesus we oftentimes don't see. And he's not a dainty European. He was a mason, meaning, you know this, he probably had forearms like Popeye, I don't know. But he went in there and it wasn't like, hey guys, could you stop this? I don't really like this. This is not how I intended it. He goes to town. This is not what this courtyard was supposed to look like. See, in the back of their minds, this is what they thought. Is that this guy named Annas, and they called this Annas's bazaar or his marketplace. In his mind, he convinced people that we could put animals in there because if Gentiles and those with disabilities can go in here, well then shouldn't animals be able to go in as well? Now you're asking the question, why did they put animals in there? Well, every year they would come for the Passover and they would come and make various sacrifices. Those with more means would bring a lamb. Those with less means would bring these pigeons. But oftentimes they couldn't bring the lamb or the pigeon that far away. And so Annas and different priests before him had created an opportunity for people to be able to buy animals there. But the problem is that these people were extortionists. These people were corrupt. And so you would show up and you would pay immense amounts of money for a lamb, immense amounts of money for a pigeon. They were totally robbing from the people for their own ends. And in fact, you had a little coin that you would bring in that was called the temple coin. And you would bring your money, your various exchanges, and they would rip you off for this. It just became a nasty place. And here comes Jesus, knowing fully well what this is supposed to look like. And Jesus says, And he began to turn over the tables. He started his ministry this way back in John 2. In that case, it said he had a whip and he was driving people out. I don't know what it must have looked like, but can you imagine? I mean, if I took and flipped this table over, you'd be like, hey, whoa, dude, relax. Animals running everywhere, dust going all over the place. It says also that in the book of Mark that he wouldn't even let anyone carry anything through. People would try to carry through and he's like, no, you don't. And he's pushing people out of this little courtyard of the Gentiles. Everything is being removed. And in my mind, I've always tried to imagine what did that look like for this stonemason who had walked all over, right? He wasn't tubby. He wasn't skinny. He was probably a pretty decently built man. And as he begins to do this with the dust going everywhere, I just imagine what Jesus looked like. Breathing heavily, tables flipped everywhere. That look in his eyes like, no, don't you dare bring that in. This was never intended to be that kind of a place. And that's where we have it. Now, what did that look like? People on the outskirts, right, of the temple courtyard going, what in the world is going on? Who allowed this to happen? Dust in the air, animals going everywhere. And into it now, it's not just that he was going to cleanse the temple, but he was going to tell him why. It's because God had a different intent. In this, he comes in and he says this statement, it's written, it's come back to Isaiah 56, that it was talking about this idea that this temple that people were going to come to, it wasn't just any old place. It was a place in which they were going to encounter God. It was a place of prayer, not just prayer, but prayer for, look at that, I love this term, all peoples. I don't care where you come from. It is designed for all people to be able to come and encounter the living God. My house, he says in there, shall be a house of prayer. In Mark and Luke, it adds to it for all the nations. How dare you do what you do? In fact, he then says this statement in there, this is what it was supposed to be, but you have now made it into a den of robbers. You extort people. You're corrupt. You've made it so comfortable in here like a robber that goes off to his den with all the other robbers that takes his loot. He feels comfortable there. In other words, he's saying to them, you have made the wrong people comfortable inside of my Father's house. That's why I'm driving them out. Get out of my Father's house. And there's Jesus, breathing hard, looking out at them, fulfilling Jeremiah 7, in which this is what he was talking about. Don't you dare do this. It's not how my God meant this to be. Well, it wasn't only that there was an intent, he was going to fulfill God's will, but I love this. This Messiah, this one, was going to also show his heart. See, sometimes I think we see God so far and distant, right? And even with Jesus, right? He reigns and rules over the entire universe. As King of Kings and Lord of Lords, we know this from the book of Colossians, that by him all things hold together. Everything holds together by him. He keeps it together. You want to know why you don't fly apart all your molecules? It's because Jesus Christ keeps every one of us together. And that kind of power, it's like, whoa, I don't know what I want to do with that. And here's Jesus. And I love this next statement. I can't wait for you to read this next statement. This is good. And the blind and the lame came to him in the temple. Everyone else is like, I ain't going in there. You gonna go in there? I'm not going in there. But this very place, as it was designed, this place to encounter the Gentiles, these ones that God wanted them to see, that he is a God not just of a people, but of the nations, this one that would come in, and he's not just the God of the able, but also those with different abilities. He is a God of all people. And into this mix with everything going on, dust all flying in the place, in comes these people that are lame and blind. I don't know how they came in. Maybe the lame people looked at the blind people and said, look, you can't see, but you can walk. So why don't you walk and I'll see, but let's go in there. Why? Why? Well, I think it's because in like Jeremiah 31, we know this, is that when the Messiah shows up, when the Messiah comes amongst his people, they're going to come from the farthest places around. Among them will be, look at this, in Jeremiah 31, the blind and the what? Lame. I don't know if one of them looked at all of them and said, hey, if this really is the Messiah and he's cleaning things up, that means he's here for us. Let's go. And in they walked. Now again, what must that have looked like? Oh, we know it wasn't just that he had a heart that was for these broken, truly encountering God, what the temple was for, but he was going to heal the broken. It says they came to him, and look at this, I love this. He healed them. He got rid of all the riffraff, right? Everybody begins to leave, and it's like, you want to see the Messiah? He cleans that whole thing out, and in now starts to come the blind and the lame, those that weren't supposed to go or that were being kept from coming into that particular area. In they walk, and Jesus, one by one, begins to heal these different people. It was that promise of what John the Baptist, he told him, look, I want you to go ask Jesus if he's really the Messiah. And he tells them, you go back and tell John, yes, of course I am. I'm the one who's going to come because you will know this, because I will be healing the blind and the lame. Now say verse 6 in the back of your head, this idea of blessed is the one who's not offended by me. But they knew there's Messiah. His target was the temple. His purpose was cleansing it out. His intent was to fulfill God's will. His heart was that the broken might encounter God. And then he healed the broken. Now, the natural response, you would think, is what? Oh, I think it's praise. Now, watch this. It says the chief priests and the scribes saw the wonderful things that he did. And look at this. The children crying out in the temple, Hosanna to the Son of David. Where did they learn that? Yesterday from their parents. They're screaming praise to the King. In fact, it comes out of Psalm 8, verse 2, in which out of the mouth of infants and nursing babes, I have prepared praise. That's what he quotes to him. You'll know the Messiah is there when these little ones even begin to acknowledge it. Now think about this. Gentiles, the lame, the blind, the children. The Messiah isn't just here for the high and the mighty and the powerful, those with things, those with money. He is here for all peoples, and he shows up. The blind and the lame are the first ones to go to him. The children begin to sing praise. And let me just say this, the Messiah was there. There's this picture in Ezekiel back in the day in which it shows an image of the glory of the Lord leaving the temple. God's saying, I'm not going to dwell amongst you like that. And I was thinking about it because it talks about the idea that when there's going to come a time in which the glory of the Lord is going to return to the temple. Let me just say this. For eons and eons they had waited, and the glory of the Lord was there. That promise of Ezekiel, he's coming back. And there he is. See, this is what God's heart is. When we talk about the Nagi people, when we talk about Ali, we desire that people would encounter this King. They would come to know this one that doesn't just have a heart for the high and the mighty and the powerful, but a heart for all people, because all people are created in the image of God. And if you take it a step further, Jesus said, my body will be the temple. We learn about that. But we also know that this right here, this group of people called the church, we're the temple. We're to be that place in which people encounter the living God, not just the high and the mighty and the powerful, but those that are lame and blind, those with differing abilities, those from different economic and socioeconomic backgrounds, those with different melanin inside of their skin, those from all kinds of different places. Later on, by the time we get to Matthew 28, he says, I want you to preach this gospel. I want you to go and make disciples of all nations. I want them to know that all are invited to my table. It doesn't matter who they are. All are invited to my table because of the work of King Jesus. And so let me say this to all of you in here that don't know Jesus. You are invited to the table. I don't care your background. I don't care your socioeconomic position. I don't care your abilities. I don't care any of those things. King Jesus demonstrated that all are invited to his table. But we don't come to him as just anybody. He's not my little buddy. He's not my little friend. We come to him as king. And I would invite anyone today that wants to know the king that Ali ran into. Today is the day to bend the knee to this great king. And the beauty is, he is awesome. But when you encounter him, you will never be the same. So praise was one way in which they did it. That was God's intended reaction. But there's another reaction that happens in which this king, this one who truly is king, but he's also this high priest, is going to be rejected. See, in the middle of all of it, these chief priests and these scribes, it says when they saw these different things, they were indignant. In other words, the word there is actually, they were wrathful. They were raged. I've always found this. Jesus has this tendency to make powerful people really upset. And I would even say this, if the church isn't making powerful people upset, we're probably not doing our job. If the church isn't drawing in those that are marginalized, those that are weak, those that are needy, the church probably isn't doing its job. And in this, I love this, they say to him, do you hear what these are saying? Do you hear them? They're calling you Messiah. And I love Jesus' answer. Do you hear this? Yep. Look at, yes, I'm Messiah. You're right. All throughout the book of Matthew, he's been, shh, don't tell anybody, shh, don't tell anybody, shh. No, don't tell anybody. And in this particular situation, he just looks at him and goes, yep, I am. I am. Now we know what happens is that those who are blessed are those who are not offended, but those who are offended are the opposite of blessed, cursed. It says in there, they were seeking for now a way to destroy him. Jesus is in control of all things. If you remember right 2 weeks ago, I talked about domino after domino after domino falling. They're just going into place, and we're getting to this point where eventually we know this. They're going to organize and work against and conspire against the very King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and they're going to crucify him and think that they've defeated him, missing the fact that what was earlier talked about, and I love how Laura said this from the book of Job, you can't stop God. They thought they could put him to death, but through death, Jesus defeats death. Through pain, he defeats pain. Through submitting himself, he gains the royal ruling that was owed him, that was deserved him. You can't stop our King. But Jesus, in this moment, it says he left. In other words, he said, I'm done. That's it. The day before, the king had left. This one that Hebrews 4 calls the high priest now goes, I'm out. They had no clue. See, that's why this kind of scenario is so important that I talked about, and I said, keep it back in your mind in verses 18 and 19 of chapter 21. It was signifying the fact that that particular group of people, they were dead. They were done. King Jesus now was just going to be a prophet to them. You don't want a king and you don't want a high priest? Go get a prophet. But here's what I also love. He might have been done with them, but Jesus isn't done. They came up to him, right? And I love this. It actually says Peter was probably the one that said this. They marveled, saying, how did that fig tree wither at once? Like what the world, right? I mean, let's be honest. If all of a sudden, let's say this tree was live and I walked up to it and I went, you'd be like, dang, something's going on there. Like you're not sure what's going on. He was wanting them to understand that while he might be done in this particular area, that doesn't mean that he's done. God still intends to be this one who engages the nations, who becomes a blessing to all peoples. He was making sure that these guys understood that at the end of the day, he might be finished in this arena, but he is not done accomplishing his purposes all over the world. That statement, if you can take this mountain and throw it into the sea, was meaning, you can't stop me. You can't stop my people. My message is going to go all over the place. My message is going to go into Europe. My message is going to go into Africa. My message is going to go into Asia. It's going to get into Europe, and it's going to go to North America and South America. It's going to go to all different parts of Asia. Eventually, it's even going to get to this weird penal colony that they call Australia. And isn't it crazy? Eventually, it was going to get to a group of people that you saw on the screen called the Nagi. You can't stop our God. He might have been rejected by his people. It talks about that in John 1:11. But to those who believed, he gave the right to become the children of God. Not born like we think, but born now by the Spirit. And let me just talk to you, those that are followers of Jesus. There's two things. One, we are the temple. And it's time that we continue to nurture that and flourish in that, because I believe that God is calling us to be that temple that shines like a city on that hill, beckoning those that don't know Jesus to us. We need to get rid of all those things that keep people away from us. Now, it's already going to be a difficult message for people to believe because they're going to have to bend the knee, but oftentimes I found we just put weird obstacles in the way of people. But I want Cornerstone to continue to be like we've been for 30 years. I don't know if you know that, but we've been around for 30 years. Yeah, that's crazy. But I want us to be that church that's a light to the city for 30 years or more still to come. But we need to be the temple that God has called us to be. That's the first thing. The second thing is this. I say this a lot, but I want us to reiterate it. You can't stop our God. I am so tired of the church acting like somehow we're in a terrible position in this world. It's like, oh, the world is falling apart. Everything's going chaotic. What are we going to do? We're going to do what we've done for 2,000 years. Praise and worship the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, in whom you cannot stop him. And so for all of you out there that are followers of Jesus, a few weeks ago I said, let's be people of the donkey. Some of you looked at me like, what does that mean? But today I'd say this, let's be the temple. Let's be the temple that Jesus Christ said the very gates of hell, of Hades, cannot stop. Let's get rid of this idea that we're dour and sour and feeling like the world is falling apart, because that belittles the very God that we serve. There ain't nothing falling apart. Our God is only beginning. And so in the name of the Father, who absolutely loves his name, in the name of the Son who came to display his Father, in the name of the Spirit who empowers us to make much of the Son. Oh, Cornerstone, May we be the temple that God designed us to be, in the name of the Father, in the name of the Son, in the name of the Holy Spirit. And all God's people said, amen.